Benjamin Netanyahu says he is summoning the U.S. ambassador Daniel Shapiro after the U.S. allowed a United Nations resolution condemning Israel's settlements to pass. Israel also summoned the ambassadors of 10 countries that voted for the resolution. A foreign ministry spokesman said that the meetings were, quote, to express deep anger and dissatisfaction as a result of the vote of countries that consider themselves friends of Israel. Now, that vote sparked a bipartisan backlash from many here in the U.S. who thought the United States should have backed Israel and voted against the measure, which would have killed it. CNN correspondent Oren Lieberman is in Jerusalem for us now. Now, Oren, explain the significance of the Israeli prime minister summoning these ambassadors, especially America's.
Well, this is a way of expressing anger, disappointment, frustration when there is some conduct by some other country, in this case especially the United States, that angers Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. This is another one of the series of diplomatic steps we've seen unfolding since shortly after this resolution passed. It is rare. It is considered a fairly major step to summon an ambassador for criticism, and that's what we've learned these meetings essentially are. Netanyahu criticizing the decision of these countries to vote in favor of this resolution. At first, the U.S. wasn't on the list. It was left off because the U.S. at the Security Council vote had abstained. It had decided not to vote for the resolution. But apparently after consideration, Netanyahu decided to summon the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Dan Shapiro, for a meeting to express his disappointment about this vote. Again, it is a fairly major step. There is also something else interesting about it. Shapiro is a President Obama appointee, which means he may have just a few weeks left in office until President Obama leaves office and is replaced by President-elect Trump. Trump has already made it clear who he's picking to replace Dan Shapiro. He's picking David Friedman, his lawyer, who is also considered far more sympathetic to the settlement enterprise. He supports one of the settlements in the West Bank just outside of Ramallah. That is a pick that will make Netanyahu and his government far happier. Netanyahu, it seems, in these last few weeks wanted to express his disappointment with President Obama, and he did that not only through what he said, but also through summoning Obama's ambassador to a meeting where he expressed how angry he was. Dana?
Oren Lieberman in Jerusalem for us. Thank you so much. Now, recalling 10 ambassadors over this UN resolution vote is an unmistakable, loud and clear signal of anger from Israel. But Palestinian officials are delighted by the vote, calling it a victory for the cause of Palestinian statehood. I want to bring in now Dr. Hussam Zomlot, who is a senior advisor to the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, and he's joining me now from Ramallah. Thank you so much for being with me. First, just explain to our viewers, what does this vote mean to Palestinians?
It means a victory for our very legitimate cause, a cause that has sought for many years the right of self-determination, for a state we can call our own, for a home, for a passport, for our freedom to move and elect our political bodies. We have been deprived this right by successive Israeli governments, particularly this current one that has seen the most extreme right-wing elements in it. It's a victory for the cause of peace, because if Mr. Netanyahu means the two-state solution, he should be happy and celebrating this resolution. It's a victory for internationalism and the international responsibility to bring about peace and security worldwide. And this is not a resolution against Israel. This is a resolution against Israel's expansion. This is a resolution against the illegal settlement expansion that has been embraced by Netanyahu for many years. It is a...
Yes. Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to, we're going to talk about more of the substance of it, but I just want to ask you a question about some of the behind-the-scenes mechanics. There are reports that the Palestinians and the Obama administration officials there, namely the Secretary of State John Kerry, colluded to put this UN resolution in motion. Is that true? Was there coordination between you, the Palestinians, and the United States?
This is a resolution that was tabled by the UN Security Council members, that the US is one of 15 other members. There has been a concerted efforts by our mission in New York, the Palestinian mission, by our president here, by our friends worldwide, to really do something to stop the daily bleeding of the two-state solution and to stop the daily illegalities.
But was John Kerry involved in trying to push for this to happen with Saeb Erekat?
No, Saeb Erekat has come officially and denied all these reports. The U.S. has taken its own position. We have heard Samantha Power, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, in her remarks after the vote, and she said that she represents the United States of America. She represents both the Democratic Party and the Republicans. She represents the long-standing, unwavering policy of the U.S. that considers settlements to be illegal and must cease. And she quoted from President Reagan to President Obama. So the U.S. has just casted its position based on its long-held policy. Nothing has changed. We are just wondering why we are considering this to be the exception. In fact, what the U.S. has done is just in line with its own law, its own policy, and with the international law.
Well, as you well know, the critics, and there are many of them here in the United States, bipartisan, argue that it's the forum, it's the UN. And so my question for you is, you obviously won a big political victory at the UN on Friday, but the terrain here in the United States will be quite different in a few weeks when Donald Trump becomes president. Is there any fear that that move only antagonized him and his bipartisan allies in Congress against the Palestinians?
Well, if the move at the UN was really anti-peace, if the move was not to affirm the two-state solution, if the move was not to affirm the quest for coexistence between the two societies, if the move was really not to affirm the long-standing U.S. policy, I would understand the question. But the move was just to really save us and Israel and borrow time and craft our way towards the future. If you read the resolution, you will find out that this is the best for both Palestinians and Israelis. The problem is that if Netanyahu argues and is allowed to argue that the UN Security Council, which is the highest political and legal entity in the globe, is a place that should not discuss international issues, then we should dismantle the UN altogether.
The fact that you said that is, it maybe not dismantle, is certainly being discussed, at least the idea of withholding funds from the U.S., which is a big chunk of their budget. I want to play for you something that Senator Lindsey Graham told me yesterday, saying he's not only going to lead the charge to withhold U.S. funding to the UN, but also to you, to Palestinians. And he cited a story of something that he said happened to a U.S. citizen from his home state. Take a listen.
Taylor Force was a young man whose parents live in South Carolina, West Point graduate, went to Israel on a visit as part of a graduate exchange program and was killed by a Palestinian, and the body was sent back to Ramallah, and he was given a state funeral, and his family was paid a big lump sum of cash by the Palestinian Authority because he was a hero in their eyes.
What's your reaction to that, but specifically the idea that there clearly is going to be a move in the U.S. Congress to stop giving the Palestinians financial aid?
Well, first, the case that the senator just mentioned is very regrettable. We have condemned it in the strongest words officially by the president. And second, there are thousands of Palestinians who lose their lives throughout this conflict by the occupation and by the force of the Israeli army. This is not the cause. This is not the issue. The issue is how do we move forward? And if the senator and all those who talk about our move in the UN to be anti-peace, if they really have any other alternative, we are willing to listen. We have tried the path of bilateral talks for 23 years. The U.S. has sponsored these peace talks for all these years, including the latest round that was invited by Senator Kerry, the Secretary of State Kerry. And then he went back to the Congress and said the Netanyahu government has really did not deliver its promises and has made the peace process not work. So the question is, where do we go, ma'am? Where do we go? If we don't have the United Nations as the home for international legitimacy, if we don't have the globe to come and sort this situation, if we don't seek international law, what do we do? Actually, to Senator Lindsey, we say the best alternative to these criminal acts in both sides is the reversion to international legitimacy, is to seek international law, is to ensure that there is some sort of a third party that could enforce its will on us, because we have tried the two sides to sort it out for too long by our own, and we did not succeed because the imbalance of power and the successive Israeli governments have tried to grab more land. During these 23 years, the Israeli settlement expanded.
I want to talk about that important point that you brought up looking forward, because it's going to be a whole new world. First, about your own leadership. Do you think it is time for new blood inside the Palestinian leadership, and even perhaps the man that you advise, Mahmoud Abbas? Perhaps it's time for him to go, or at least to hold new elections, and could that help at least one part of the process of moving forward?
This is not a matter for the CNN or for the international community. This is a Palestinian national matter, and the Palestinian people will choose and elect those who see fit.
What do you think, sir?
To lead them. I think the president, Mahmoud Abbas, was voted with a consensus in the last party congress that was held only 2 weeks ago. He has the support of his party and his movement, and I firmly believe should he run the national elections for the president, supported by his party, he will win a landslide, because Palestinians are not just looking for new blood, they are looking for real blood that could carry us through this very turmoil and very difficult time. The Palestinian people at large believe in his strategy of non-violence, in his strategy of making sure that we have international support, and it has been paying off, and his strategy to make sure that we have stability and security under a very adverse circumstances of occupation and colonization and siege. I think people vote for his ideas, vote for his success. It was also him personally and his credibility with the US, his credibility with Europe and the rest of the world that brought the fruits in the UN Security Council 2 days ago. So people are watching that. This is not about old or young. There are some old people with young ideas, and there are some young people like me with old ideas.
Dr. Zumlatt, we're running out of time, but I just want to ask one final question about the idea of new blood. There will be new blood in the United States. Donald Trump, he has made it very, very clear that trying to finally find a way for there to be a workable peace process between Palestinian and Israelis is a top priority, and he wants to try to get it done. He's obviously not the first president elect to say that, but he is somebody who comes from a really different world. Do you think it is possible that the fact that he is sort of unshackled with or by the constraints of traditional diplomacy could actually be helpful? Or do you have hope?
Yesterday, I celebrated Christmas in the place where you should celebrate Christmas, in the Church of Nativity, the place of birth for Jesus. I joined the president, the Palestinian president, and he said to hundreds of believers, he hoped that President-elect Trump will really start focusing on us, and our hands are extended, our hearts are open, our hopes are high, and our prayers in the Christmas Eve is that he is going to be the one who's going to make the deal. Absolutely, we are willing, we are ready to move with him towards the journey of peace. We need it, the Israeli people need it, the region needs it, and the US needs it. We just need to really focus on how do we tell Netanyahu that you can no longer have the cake and eat it too. You can no longer implement all these policies, adverse policies against the US law, against the logic of peace, and get away with it. Either we sit on a table and sort it, or you will have to bear the consequences of illegalities.
Dr. Hussam Zomlot, thank you very much for ending on that hopeful message, and thank you very much for joining me on this Christmas Day from Ramallah. Appreciate it.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. You too. And this just in, we just heard from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu weighing in on this very issue of the U.S. abstaining from the vote in the UN this week. Take a listen.
Over decades, American administrations and Israeli governments have disagreed about settlements, but we agreed that the Security Council was not the place to resolve this issue. We knew that going there would make negotiations harder and drive peace further away. And as I told John Kerry on Thursday, friends don't take friends to the Security Council. I'm encouraged by the statements of our friends in the United States, Republicans and Democrats alike. They understand how reckless and destructive this UN resolution was. They understand that the Western Wall isn't occupied territory. I look forward to working with those friends and with the new administration when it takes office next month.
Tough words there from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We'll be back with more on this and much, much more right after a break.